Hello, everybody. This is Corey, and in today's core concept video, we will be taking a look at regular expressions in PowerShell. Regular expressions, sometimes called regex for short, are a way of doing pattern matching, and it should be something that's very familiar for programmers and scripters, even folks that use Linux or grep. Using regex is very ubiquitous in the world of IT, and it's also something that can be utilized within PowerShell. So recently, I've actually had a need to utilize this, and I thought it would be a good subject for one of our videos. So today we'll take a look at an example of how to utilize this in a script. So first of all, I wanted to mention that with my example that I needed it for recently, I had a document and it was a very large text document, and it was sort of a very disorganized data dump from one of our systems where I work. And in that a whole bunch of data were server names, and we needed to find a way to kind of scrape through the text document and extract all of those server names and output that into a CSV file. So I thought I would replicate something similar for us today. So I'm going to start off by creating this array of strings. Now, I wanted to quickly point out that that is exactly what you get if you are familiar with the gitcontent commandlet. So I have this test text document here, and if I were to go ahead and run line 2, I would use gitcontent, and I would take what's in this document. I'll go ahead and open it here. It's basically just a replication of what I'm going to have in that array. So here's my text document. I've gotten the contents of it. And now if I were to take a look at the X variable that I just assigned it to and use the getType method, I would see that the base type of this here is a system array. So if I go ahead and run this here, lines 3 through 9, and create this array, if I look at the type of this variable, obviously it's going to be the same thing. So let's just look at that method. So system array. So when you're using gitcontent on a text document, that's creating an array of strings. So if you were to look again back at X, and just look at the first position of the array, that's your first string. So what you have when you do gitcontent there again is just an array of strings. So in that array of strings here, I've got this for each loop going on. So for each string in my array of strings, I want to, first of all, break it down a little bit more into some substrings. And the reason I'm doing this on line 14 is because, well, and maybe we could have a dialogue about this in the chat below. And I'd like to do some more videos about regex because it's something that I don't use enough, and I'm trying to myself learn how to use it more. So one thing I found just in my limited research to find a solution for my particular use case was that the match here on line 17, this match operator, it tends to, it seems that it just finds the first instance of a pattern, which what I have highlighted here is actually the regex, which we'll talk about more in depth in a moment. But what I found is that that is just going to find the first instance of that pattern in your string. And as you can see in my example strings, these have a number of server names. If you look at my name pattern in my examples here, it starts out, all of them start out with the word server, and then after that there's some numbers there. So if I wanted to pluck out these server names here, you'll note that in this string alone and in each subsequent string, there are two different names here. The match will only seemingly find the first instance. Um, And what worked with my data was that my data was full of single space characters. So what I decided to do in order to break this down into substrings was use this split method. And the way that that works, that's a method of the string class. So for every string in the array of strings, I'm using split. I'm splitting that string on this first argument. So every time it encounters a single space, it's going to split it off into another string. And then it's going to assign that new array of strings to this split string variable. And then inside of that, I'm going to do another for loop. So for every split in split string, that's where I'm going to do my pattern matching. So if split match and then this pattern. So first of all, match is your operator. These are your operands, I guess you could say. And then here is the regex itself. So let's take a moment to talk about the regex. So with these square bracket symbols, anything inside of that square bracket is what it's going to look for first. So in this, I have S, and then the second character is that it's going to encounter in the pattern of here is E. So if it encounters an S followed by an E, and then what about this backslash D? So what the backslash D is, if it's capitalized, is it's going to look for any letter character. And if it's a lowercase d, so backslash lowercase d, it'll look for any numerical character. Now, the plus after it means that it's going to look for that pattern until it finds a non-letter character. And in this example, it's going to keep finding numbers until it doesn't find a number. So the way that this would read is it starts with S, it's followed by E, then it can be followed by any series of letters until it hits something else, in which case it's going to look for numbers, and then it's going to look for any number until it gets something else. So it's gonna, so that's basically going to capture the entirety of any possible combination of this naming convention for these, fictitious servers in my example here. Something I wanted to mention too is that instead of plus, you could actually instead limit it. So plus is going to keep looking like we said here for D at the end. It's going to look for numbers until it doesn't find one anymore. But if you wanted it to only look for, say, 3 numbers instead of the plus, you could do curly brace, the number of those characters you want it to look for, followed by a closing curly brace. But in this instance, we will just look at the plus. We'll run it twice though. We'll run it twice and we'll show the output difference just to kind of solidify that. So one other thing before I run this that I wanted to mention that I learned through this exercise was that the match here, when you're doing a match operation, there's actually a match variable and it just exists. So anytime it finds that match, it sticks the match into a match variable. And that's what I'm going to return to the screen. So let me just go ahead and save this and run it. So here's my array. And then I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. And we'll just run it. So it's going to create this array of strings. It's going to loop through them. It's going to split them up to 10,000 times, which, should be enough for us here, but maybe not in your use case. And then for each of those splits, it's going to further analyze it and see if it matches our pattern. And if it does match that pattern, it's just going to return the output to our shell screen. So let's run it. And there we go. So you'll notice in my strings here, I have 2 server names per string, and I have 5 total strings, so that's 10. And if you look at our output here, we actually were able to find all 10 of those and then go ahead and return that output. Now from here, you could make like a PS custom object and do any number of things there where you would be able to then export CSV or whatnot. So one thing I wanted to mention about the matches variable is that the reason I am actually looking at the reason I have this open closing square bracket with a 0 is because if you just look at matches, which will be the last iteration of the loop, so this final server 444 is here, you'll notice that it's both a name and a value. So if you do 0, you're just going to get the name there instead of both. So if you look at that there, I've actually not done this. Let's do get type on this. So it's a hash table. Yeah, so you've got your basically key value pairs there. So that is something interesting. I didn't realize there was just a matches variable that's created when it finds the match, and then it populates that with what it found. So at this point, I wanted to take a look at the output if we did just the 3 there. So let's replace the plus with the curly brackets, 3 curly brackets, and run it again. Save it and run it. Notice that the output is different, and it's not really what we want because it's sort of truncating the server names that have more than just 3 numerical digits at the end there. Notice that that is now limited to just the 3 characters as we defined it here in the regex expression. But again, if we change that to plus and then run it, we see that we're getting all of the numbers at the end until it hits that first non-number character. So in the example of this server 1, 2, 3, 4, it hits the A and it stops. And the same is true as of it hitting a space character. So it's not a number character, so it stops there. It goes all the way up to the end point instead of truncating it off. So very interesting. Something else I wanted to talk about while we were on the topic is just a couple other things I found interesting in my research were these particular symbols. So this caret symbol here represents the start of a string. If you're wanting to find white space characters, it's \s. So we've kind of covered \uppercase D, \lowercase d, so \s would be if you're trying to find a white space character. Then you've got the plus sign we've already kind of talked about, which is one or more of what precedes. And then finally, the end of a string, if you want to define that, is going to be with your $sign character. So that is pretty much this topic for now. There are a lot of places to go with regex. It's kind of endlessly valuable and interesting. So if you found this to be helpful and you would like to discuss the topic further, especially ways to leverage it in PowerShell, then just let me know in the comments below. There are definitely things we haven't discussed, just like select string, which is sort of like your grep equivalent that's in PowerShell. And there are other topics too. I'm going to actually link to some Microsoft documentation on this in the video description, so be sure to check that out. But again, if you found this interesting or if you would like to have a follow-up video, please just let me know down in the comments. So thank you very much. I hope you found this informative, and I would like to thank you for viewing.